They said I was the last person to see him alive. That sentence clung to me like a curse, whispered in every corner of the office, written between the lines of every news article, carried on the breath of strangers who stared too long. It didn't matter that I had no proof, no reason, no motive they could trace. It didn't matter that I had never harmed anyone in my life. To them, I was guilty the moment his absence echoed through the glass towers of our company. The CEO's son wasn't just another man. He was their heir, their crown jewel, their golden child who floated above all of us in polished shoes and careless laughter. His smile could bend rules. His last name opened doors that stayed bolted for the rest of us. And when he vanished, the company didn't just lose a man. It lost its symbol, its future, its god they had built temples to in boardrooms and press releases. And I was the offering they chose to burn. The night he disappeared plays in my head in flickers of light and shadow, like a broken film reel. The office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, alive. The hum of the servers kept me company as I typed reports no one else would read. As usual, that's when he stopped at my desk. Not for long, not with any weight of meaning, just a fleeting question. Why do you always stay so late? His tone wasn't kind, wasn't cruel, just curious, detached, like a man glancing at a painting he would never buy. And yet that fleeting moment became the axis of my ruin. The next morning, he was gone. His car found abandoned near the river. His phone switched off forever. No ransom notes, no demands, no trail. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. The city searched, the police questioned, the media devoured every scrap, and still, nothing. A vanishing act too clean, too sudden, too deliberate. But in the middle of that storm, one rumor caught like wildfire. He was last seen speaking to her. Her, the invisible woman, the one who rarely laughed, who never joined happy hours, who worked late into the night. Me. I watched the narrative form around me like quicksand. She was obsessed with him. Didn't you hear? She once followed him after work. She wanted him. And when she couldn't have him, she snapped. Lies layered upon lies, until even my reflection in the mirror seemed to agree. And the cruelest part? I stayed silent. Silence, I discovered, was its own weapon. The CEO summoned me not long after. His office was a palace of glass and steel, perched high above the city, where the skyline looked like something he owned. He stared at me with eyes that had once charmed investors and crushed rivals. Now they were filled with something rawer, grief sharpened into rage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any accusation. He believed I was guilty. He wanted me to confess, to beg, to crumble under the weight of his gaze. But I didn't. I simply met his stare and said nothing, because I knew something he didn't. The night his son disappeared, he left me something. A folded slip of paper wedged beneath my keyboard, hurriedly scrawled in jagged letters. If they ask, you don't know me. If they press, you never saw me. If they dig, tell them nothing. Please, don't trust anyone. I burned it, I had to. If they found it, they would twist it into something monstrous. They would say it proved I lured him, that I conspired with him, that I was part of his vanishing act. But even without the paper, the words remained carved into me. He wasn't running from me. He was running from them. The company, his family, the empire they built. That's who he feared. And now, as they circle me like wolves, I feel something awakening inside. Something sharp, something patient. Let them smear my name across headlines. Let the police ransack my apartment. Let strangers spit on the ground when I walk past. Every wound, every scar they carve into me is fuel. Because here is the truth they will never admit. When their heir vanished, their kingdom cracked. And when kingdoms crack, secrets spill. I am not guilty of his disappearance, but I am guilty of something far more dangerous. I am guilty of remembering. I am guilty of knowing. I am guilty of waiting. And when the time comes, when the weight of their lies presses too heavy, I will turn their hunt into a noose around their own necks. This isn't the story of a woman framed. This is the story of what happens when you choose the wrong woman to blame. And when revenge finally comes, it won't whisper. It will roar. The police came to my apartment 3 nights after he vanished. They knocked, but it wasn't the polite knock of courtesy. It was the heavy pounding of authority, of men who already believed what they were about to find. My neighbors stood in the hall, pretending not to watch, but lingering anyway, their eyes darting toward me like I was some kind of spectacle. And maybe I was. After all, how often did a woman like me, quiet, invisible, ordinary, become the center of a scandal that stretched across the city? They tore through my belongings like vultures, drawers overturned, clothes scattered, every page of every notebook scrutinized. They took my laptop, my phone, my flash drives, even my journals filled with nothing but half-written thoughts and grocery lists. They didn't ask. They didn't think. They just assumed. I watched them pull my life apart, piece by piece, searching for evidence that didn't exist. But in their failure, I could see their satisfaction. Because to them, the absence of proof wasn't innocence. It was mystery. And mystery was always worse. The next morning, my face was plastered across every screen. My office badge photo, the one with bad lighting. My tired eyes half closed and became the picture of guilt. Employee questioned in CEO's son's disappearance. That was the headline. They didn't need to call me a suspect. They didn't need to prove anything. All they had to do was feed the public a face, a name, a narrative, and the rest would follow. I became the office ghost before I was gone. Colleagues stopped looking me in the eye. Some flinched when I passed their desks. Others whispered in clusters, certain I couldn't hear, but making sure I could feel the weight of their stares. The HR manager, a woman who once praised me for my diligence, now avoided me entirely, as if my shadow might contaminate hers. The CEO himself never spoke to me again after that first confrontation, but I saw him in the hallways, his grief hardening into fury, his power bending reality around him. He didn't need to say I was guilty. His silence declared it louder than words. And still I stayed. I walked into that office every morning, sat at my desk and typed reports no one would read, because leaving would mean surrender. And I was not surrendering. I began to notice things others didn't. Nervous glances exchanged between executives, quick meetings behind closed doors, shredded papers piling in bins more often than before. The company was unraveling, just slightly, just enough for anyone who cared to notice. And I noticed everything. That's when the memories of his note began to haunt me. Don't trust anyone. His handwriting was messy, uneven, written in desperation. He wasn't warning me about strangers, about outsiders. He was warning me about the very people now hunting me. His disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. And if he was running from them, then what did that make me? The woman they chose to blame in his place. A pawn, a scapegoat, or something more dangerous. The more they pushed me down, the more I felt something stir inside me. A quiet, cold resolve. If they wanted me to be the villain, then perhaps I should become one. Not in their story, but in my own. Not the monster they imagined, but the reckoning they deserved. My revenge wouldn't be swift. Swift would be too merciful. My revenge would be slow, patient, threaded through every corner of their empire until they didn't even realize they were already bleeding. I began collecting. Not evidence for the police. No, I owed them nothing. I collected whispers, documents, loose files left unattended, fragments of emails flashing briefly on screens as I passed. Tiny things, too small to mean much alone, but together, they began to form a picture. A picture of corruption, fraud, betrayal, the very foundation of the company cracking beneath the surface. And each night, when the office emptied and silence returned, I stayed. I searched deeper. I found traces of cover-ups, payments hidden under layers of false accounts, deals struck with names they'd never want made public. Every secret I discovered, I tucked away like a dagger waiting to be unsheathed. They thought they had cornered me. They thought my silence meant defeat. But silence, I was learning, could also mean strategy. They took everything from me, my reputation, my safety, my name. But they forgot the most important truth of all. The woman you erase is the woman who remembers. And I remember everything. The police returned a week later. This time they didn't come with questions. They came with accusations dressed as certainty. "We've spoken to witnesses," one of them said, his voice carrying the weight of authority he hadn't earned. "Several colleagues claim you were overly interested in him, following his routines, watching him more than was appropriate." I laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, but softly. The way someone laughs at a bitter joke they didn't ask to hear, because I knew what those witnesses were. They weren't witnesses. They were cowards, desperate to distance themselves from suspicion, happy to throw me into the fire if it meant the flames wouldn't touch them. I told them nothing. No denial, no defense. Just silence. My lawyer, the cheapest one I could afford, assigned more out of pity than faith, told me my silence made me look guilty. But what he didn't understand was that speaking would make me a pawn in their game, and I refused to play. The CEO's grief was now public, staged for cameras outside his mansion, for board meetings broadcast to trembling investors. He stood tall, composed, the image of a man holding his empire together even as it bled. And behind his carefully rehearsed sorrow, his eyes burned with a single mission: to see me destroyed. But grief can blind, rage can rot judgment, and I intended to use that. The first step was small, almost invisible. Late one evening, when the office was hollow and echoing, I accessed the internal file servers, a privilege granted to me long ago, forgotten because no one ever noticed me enough to take it back. Hidden beneath layers of project folders, I found something peculiar: duplicate contracts, altered numbers, invoices shuffled between shell companies. Not enough to scream fraud, not yet, but enough to whisper. I copied them. Not to hand to the police. No, they had already chosen their story. I copied them to keep, to weave into the tapestry of destruction I was slowly stitching. Meanwhile, the whispers about me grew louder. In the cafeteria, forks paused mid-air when I entered. Conversations died. Once, I heard someone hiss the word kidnapper under their breath as I passed. Another time, I caught a colleague deleting emails the moment I walked by, as if my presence alone was poison. But what none of them realized was that their fear fed me. Every glance, every whisper, every accusation added weight to the mask they forced upon me. And behind that mask, I moved unseen. The CEO's assistants were careless, overwhelmed by the chaos. They left documents unattended, messages half-read on glowing screens, drawers unlocked. Piece by piece, I gathered fragments: secret payments to unnamed parties, non-disclosure agreements signed under duress, a photograph, quickly deleted but not fast enough, of his son with men. I recognized from the news, men tied to scandals the company had buried years ago. It painted a picture the world didn't want to see. The CEO's son wasn't a victim of me. He was a victim of his family. But that truth wasn't ready yet. Truth, I knew, was a weapon, and a weapon must be sharpened before it cuts. So I waited. One night, as rain battered the city and the building hummed with the sound of stormwater, against glass, I sat alone in the office, sifting through files when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not the hurried kind of someone working late, but the heavy tread of someone searching. I froze, listening. The steps stopped just beyond my cubicle wall. For a moment, silence stretched unbearable. Then a voice, low, male, unfamiliar. "You should have left when you had the chance." When I turned, the hall was empty. I told myself I imagined it, that paranoia was eating me alive, but the chill crawling down my spine told me otherwise. They weren't just blaming me anymore. They were watching me. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were afraid of what I might know. The day after the footsteps, I noticed changes. Small, almost unremarkable shifts. But in an office built on routines, even the smallest tremor feels like an earthquake. My desk had been moved 2 inches to the left. Not by me. My files, the ones I always stacked in neat piles, were shuffled, edges bent as if someone had thumbed through them. The faint smell of cologne, not mine, lingered in the air. Someone had been inside my space. The message was clear: we can reach you whenever we want. I told no one. What good would it have done? If I reported it, they'd say I was paranoid, unstable, desperate for attention. That's how it always works when you've already been branded guilty. So I did what I always did. I stayed silent. I watched. I remembered. And then I acted. It began with an email. Not from me. I wasn't reckless enough for that. But from a nameless account I created in the shadows of the internet cafes that no one in the city noticed anymore. An email with a single attachment. A redacted contract that hinted at fraud within the company. Just a whisper of truth. Sent to a financial blog too small to make headlines, but large enough to plant suspicion. Within days, investors started asking questions. Not loudly, not publicly, but questions all the same. I saw it in the way executives rushed to closed-door meetings, in the tension thickening the air during conference calls. They didn't know it was me. They couldn't prove it. But I watched them squirm, and it was the first taste of power I had felt since the night everything collapsed. The police questioned me again. This time, their tone was sharper, impatient. They asked about my relationship with the CEO's son, twisting mundane details into something sinister. Why were you seen leaving the building 15 minutes after him? Why did you stay late so often? Why didn't you report his note if you received one? I lied, smoothly, carefully. I told them I never saw him that night. I told them I worked late because deadlines demanded it. I told them no note ever existed. My silence had become armor, and lies were simply the steel plates I added to it. but their questions confirmed something important. They were reaching. They had nothing solid, and the longer he remained missing, the more desperate they became. That night, as I sifted through digital archives, I found something that made my pulse stutter. A transfer of millions, siphoned quietly from a company account, directed to an offshore bank under the name of a shell corporation. But what caught my eye wasn't the money. It was the date. The transfer had been made the night before the sun disappeared. He hadn't vanished into thin air. He had prepared. The note he left me wasn't a plea for help. It was a warning, because he knew what was coming. And suddenly the footsteps, the whispers, the rearranged desk made sense. They weren't just trying to frame me. They were trying to see if he had left me something more than that single piece of paper. They were afraid. Fear, I realized, was the most powerful crack in their armor. And once you found the crack, all you had to do was press. So I began pressing. Quietly, patiently, I left a document half buried on the printer. One of the altered contracts. I had copied, knowing an assistant would find it and panic. I accidentally sent an email with nothing but an empty subject line to an executive who already looked tired and frayed, making him wonder what I knew. I asked small, innocent questions in meetings, questions that seemed harmless, but left people pale and shifting in their seats. They didn't know if I was dangerous. They didn't know if I had proof, and that uncertainty became my weapon. The whispers about me changed. No longer just kidnapper or obsessed. Now, I caught fragments like she knows something, and what if she isn't lying? The fear that once crushed me was beginning to bend back on them. One night, while leaving the building, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished glass doors. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see the ghost they painted me as. I saw something sharper, darker, someone who had learned to wear silence like a blade. They thought they had chosen me as their scapegoat, but I was choosing myself as their reckoning, and I had only just begun. The first cracks appeared not in the newspapers, but in the boardroom. I watched it happen from my desk, invisible as always. Executives streamed in for a meeting, their voices raised, sharp and panicked. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The rhythm of their movements. Papers slammed down, fingers jabbing, heads shaking, and told me everything. Something was slipping, and I had slipped it. The contract I forgot on the printer had spread further than I expected. A nervous assistant, fearing blame, had shown it to his manager. That manager, already on edge, panicked and whispered it to a colleague. Whispers in a place like this don't stay whispers. They become storms. I sat at my desk with the calm of a woman drinking tea in a house fire. To them, I was still the scapegoat, the accused, the unwanted shadow. But now I was also the unknown, and nothing terrifies the powerful more than uncertainty. The CEO tried to control it. He held emergency meetings, called investors personally, even staged another public display of grief outside his mansion gates. Cameras caught him wiping a tear, with one hand while gripping his wife's trembling fingers with the other, the perfect image of a father fighting for justice. But I saw through it, the way his jaw clenched too tight when no one else was watching, the flicker of panic in his eyes. When a junior analyst nervously asked about irregularities in the financials, he was bleeding beneath the armor, and the scent of blood was beginning to spread. Meanwhile, the police pressed harder. They paraded me into the station for another round of questions, this time in a windowless room that smelled of sweat and despair. They asked about my internet searches, innocent things, twisted into something sinister. Why did you look up ferry schedules 2 months ago? Why were you researching the city's industrial district? I told them nothing, just silence, again and again, until frustration painted their faces red. One of them slammed a folder shut so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. I almost smiled, because the harder they pushed, the more obvious it became. They didn't have him. They didn't know where he was, and they feared I might. When they released me hours later, the sky was dark. Rain had soaked the streets, turning the city into a mirror. I walked home slowly, the sound of water under my shoes steady, grounding. And as I walked, I replayed the night he vanished. His sudden stop at my desk, his question, his note, his disappearance. The offshore transfer haunted me. Millions shifted the night before he left, too deliberate to be coincidence. He hadn't been taken. He had orchestrated something. But what? And why leave me the warning? Maybe he thought I was the only one who would understand, or maybe I was simply the only one who would listen. Either way, they had underestimated me. I began to push further. Late at night, I accessed old archives buried so deep most employees didn't know they existed. Reports of worker injuries buried under legal jargon. Complaints that mysteriously vanished. Settlements paid quietly to families who never spoke again. Each file was a ghost, and together they formed a graveyard beneath the company's polished floors. I didn't just save them. I cataloged them, organized them, crafted a narrative so clear even the most loyal investor would see the rot. But revenge is never only about truth. It is about timing, and so I waited, building my arsenal, while the company burned from within. Then came the night I couldn't ignore. I was leaving the office when I noticed a car parked across the street. Not unusual in the city, except this one had been there every night that week. Same dark sedan, same silhouette in the driver's seat. He never moved, never followed, just watched. I stopped on the sidewalk, staring directly at the car. The figure inside shifted slightly, as if acknowledging me. Then the engine started and the sedan pulled away into the dark. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the press. It was someone else. For the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. Because maybe the CEO wasn't the only one watching me. Maybe his son wasn't as far away as I thought. I couldn't shake the image of that car, the stillness of the driver, the unbroken stare. It felt less like surveillance and more like a warning, a reminder that I wasn't as invisible as I thought. But warnings only sharpened me. They told me I was hitting too close to the truth. The very next morning, chaos spread through the office like a virus. A major investor had pulled out, citing lack of transparency and instability. Whispers shot through the building, not about me this time, but about the company itself. Secret layoffs were being discussed. Department heads barked orders. Analysts scrambled to rewrite reports, and the CEO himself stormed through the corridors with a fury that rattled the walls. I sat quietly at my desk, watching the empire tilt. The sweet taste of their panic was more intoxicating than anything I'd ever known. But this wasn't victory. Not yet. This was only the prelude. At lunch, 2 executives argued in the corner of the cafeteria. I pretended not to hear, but their voices carried. He never should have touched that money. If anyone finds out it was his son, the rest was swallowed by their sudden silence when they noticed me passing. But it was enough. The offshore transfer was tied to the son, not the father. And if the son had siphoned money, maybe his disappearance wasn't abduction at all. Maybe it was escape. If that was true, then the entire foundation of their accusations against me crumbled. But still they pressed forward, because it was easier to point at me than admit their heir had betrayed them. That night I made my boldest move yet. In the quiet of the empty office, I accessed a restricted server. My hands trembled as I entered the code. I'd lifted from an unguarded notebook weeks earlier. The system hummed to life, revealing files never meant for eyes like mine. And there it was, a ledger. Transactions, bribes, payments to silence, all flowing in and out like veins of poison. But one entry froze me. A payment not to a family or a contractor, but to a private investigator. The description was vague, but the amount was staggering. And the date. It was from 2 weeks after the son disappeared. They hadn't been searching for him out of grief. They had been hunting him. And if they were still paying, it meant they hadn't found him yet. I copied everything. Every line, every number. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling. This was my weapon. With these files, I could topple them all. As I left the building, the air was heavy with storm clouds. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then faster, until the streets glistened like black glass. And there, across the street, the sedan was waiting again. But this time it didn't stay still. It followed me. I quickened my pace, weaving through alleys, doubling back, testing its persistence. The headlights never wavered. It stayed just far enough to keep me in sight, close enough to remind me it was there. Finally, I ducked into a crowded subway station, slipping down the steps just as the train arrived. I boarded with the crowd, my heart pounding, and watched through the window as the car above vanished into the storm. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun between the files I'd stolen and the figure in that car. Was it the CEO's men? Was it the police? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who wanted me to know they were there? I looked again at the note the son had left me, the one that started it all. Don't trust anyone. His handwriting was sharp, almost desperate. And for the first time, I wondered if the car outside wasn't a threat at all. Maybe it was protection. Maybe he was closer than I dared to believe. The storm outside mirrored the one inside me. The stolen files burned like fire on my hard drive, whispering of the Empire's rot. I could ruin them with a single keystroke. But revenge isn't just about exposure. It's about precision. about striking so cleanly that the wound never heals. I spent the next days weaving a net of silence and suggestion. I leaked fragments of the files, carefully chosen, never enough to reveal the full picture, but enough to spark chaos. A doctored settlement agreement slid anonymously into an employee's inbox. A bribe ledger appeared in a journalist's tip box with no return address. Each fragment was a drop of blood in the water, and soon the sharks began circling. The CEO tightened his grip, barking orders like a man trying to hold back the tide with his hands. His eyes, once cold steel, now flickered with the panic of a man who saw the walls closing in. The board grew restless. Investors demanded answers. Reporters lingered outside the building like vultures. And in the middle of it all, I kept my mask in place. Silent, invisible, watching. But the car returned. Every night, always at a distance, always watching. Its persistence gnawed at me, fraying the edges of my control. If it was the CEO's men, why hadn't they moved against me? If it was the police, why hide? And if it was him, I couldn't finish the thought. One night I decided to test it. I led the car on a deliberate path, through twisting alleys, across busy intersections, finally into the old industrial district where the city's shadows seemed thicker. I stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse and waited. The car pulled up slowly. The driver stepped out. For a heartbeat, my lungs forgot how to work. It wasn't a faceless enforcer. It wasn't a detective. It was him, the missing son. He looked different, thinner, harder. His once polished appearance traded for shadows and stubble. But his eyes were the same. Piercing, restless, searching. "You weren't supposed to get dragged into this," he said, voice low, raw. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The weeks of fear, rage, suspicion. All of it coiled tight inside me, demanding answers. "Why me?" I finally managed. "Why leave me the note?" "Because you were the only one who wasn't part of their game," he said. Rain streaked his face, but his gaze never wavered. I took the money. I disappeared. And I knew they'd need someone to blame. They always do. The truth hit like a blade. He had orchestrated it all. The transfer, the disappearance, the storm that followed. And he had left me to carry the weight of suspicion, to drown in it, because it was easier than facing his father's wrath. "You used me," I whispered. "No," he said quickly. "I protected you. If they thought you were guilty, they wouldn't look for me. And you'd be safe." Safe. The word was poison. Did he think my ruined reputation, the interrogations, the stalking, the fear was safety? He had carved scars into my life and called it protection. But even as fury surged through me, a new clarity sharpened my mind. He wasn't my enemy. He wasn't my ally. He was a weapon, one I could choose to wield. The company wanted him buried, erased, forgotten. The CEO wanted his betrayal silenced. The world wanted answers. And I wanted revenge. I stepped closer, until the rain between us was the only barrier. "Then help me," I said. My voice was steady now, steel wrapped in silk. "If you want to finish this, if you want to make them pay, then stand with me. Otherwise," I let the words hang, sharp as a blade, "I'll destroy you too." For a long moment he just stared at me. Then slowly he nodded. The alliance was uneasy, fragile, born of betrayal and necessity. But it was enough, because now I had everything I needed. The files, the truth, and the missing son himself. And when the strike came, it would not be a whisper in the shadows. It would be thunder. We didn't wait long. The CEO had called an emergency shareholders meeting, desperate to reassure the people whose money was slipping through his fingers. It was to be broadcast live, polished and perfect, a stage for his performance of control. He didn't know it yet, but it would become his execution ground. I arrived early. The files I had gathered were no longer scattered fragments. They were a weaponized story, sharpened into a single lethal truth. Bribes, fraud, disappearances, offshore accounts. Each detail, carefully arranged to paint him as the architect of his own ruin. And at the center of it all, his missing son, standing silently in the shadows behind me like a ghost returned to haunt him. The meeting began with bright lights, cameras, polite applause. The CEO stepped onto the stage, mask firmly in place. His voice boomed with false confidence, promising strength, stability, redemption. I sat in the back row, hands steady, heart ice cold. And then I pressed send. The files exploded across the internet. Journalists' phones buzzed. Investors' tablets lit up with damning evidence. Screens on the wall, meant to display market projections, suddenly filled with copies of contracts, ledgers, settlements, each one branded with his name. Gasps spread like wildfire. The room shifted from confidence to chaos in a single breath. The CEO froze. His mask slipped, revealing the raw fury beneath. He barked for the screens to be shut down, for security to cut the feed, but it was too late. The story had already escaped the room. And then, from the shadows, his son stepped forward. The room erupted. Cameras swung, flashes blinded, voices collided in a storm of disbelief. The prodigal heir, alive, standing against his father. "You did this!" the CEO spat, his voice cracking with rage. "You betrayed your family." "Your name?" "No," the son said, his voice steady, sharp. "I betrayed you." Gasps again. The audience leaned forward as if pulled by invisible strings. He spoke of the money, of the years of corruption he'd uncovered, of the silence his father had forced upon everyone who dared speak out. He confessed to taking the transfer, not as theft, but as evidence, proof of the empire's rot. And then he pointed to me. She was the only one I could trust, the only one who wasn't part of his game. For a moment, the room turned toward me, cameras flashing, voices whispering. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The storm was already devouring him. The CEO lunged, fury breaking through his polished mask. But security rushed in. Investors shouted. Reporters surged forward. The room became chaos. But the image was burned forever. A father undone by his son. A company gutted by its own secrets. A king dragged from his throne. By nightfall, the empire was ash. Stocks plummeted, authorities moved in. And the man who once ruled with fear now sat caged in flashing headlines. His son vanished again into the shadows, his role complete. And me? I walked out of the building into the rain, head high, silence still my blade. For weeks they had called me guilty. For weeks they had tried to break me. But now the truth was etched in every headline, every screen, every whispered conversation. I hadn't just survived their game. I had rewritten it. And as the city lights flickered in the storm, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. Revenge isn't about anger, or even justice. It's about patience, precision, timing. And when it lands, it doesn't whisper. It thunders.